Welcome back to the Bowen Island Podcast. My name is Don Schaefer, and this is part 2 of our conversation with Peter Frinton. If you recall from our earlier conversation, we were talking about the different levels of government and local service areas and the differences between government and governance. Peter has lived on Bowen with his partner Carol since 1972. He became active politically in the early 90s as a GVRD alternate and then as chair of the APC. He served on Bowen Council for 4 terms and was also an Islands Trust trustee, Metro Vancouver Director, the Mayor's Council delegate to Translink, and he served on the Treaty Advisory Commission. So I want to focus on what kind of an island we want to become. So let's talk about democracy.
Well, again, poli-sci 101. I mean, we live in, there are all kinds of democracies. Greece had a direct democracy, although it was restricted to adult males who'd served their military service. We slowly extended our vote and included women, and the Americans allowed previous slaves to vote, but we have become a representative democracy. So instead of dealing with each issue, we essentially, on a basis of trust or on the basis of what we believe to be the lies that we have been told, we elect people and we leave it to them because everybody's busy and has other things that they're doing, and governance is very complex. There are awful lot of issues that come before your plate, regardless of what level of government you're talking about. So on Bowen, we have this representational democracy, but there are all kinds of things that we could do to make it better. And I think that we have backslid quite a lot, and we are less connected and less engaged in democracy than we used to be.
Okay, so can you unpack that a bit?
I mean, we have a very elaborate committee structure. So, council takes advice from, but doesn't necessarily have to follow the advice of what their committees tell them. The only mandated ones are actually, you have to have a board of variance. It's a requirement of the province, and you have to have an advisory planning commission. So this is a commission. There used to be a requirement for a recreation commission. I'm not sure that I think it still exists. I'm not quite sure about that. So we have these committees which are very formal, and they operate actually as extensions of municipal government, and people are appointed to that usually by declaring self-interest, but they are approved by the municipal council. So they can be stacked with people that the particular council likes or dislikes. And their sole purview is to make recommendations, which go to council. So we've had a proliferation of committees. I mean, there are over 20 committees, and that is as crazy as having 13 local trust committees with the Islands Trust. So North Pender and South Pender each have their own trust committee, and you go, I think we can make this a bit more efficient. And it also tends to be, if not ossified, at least they become quite entrenched. The people who are on those committees feel it's proprietary, that it's their area, and it's not. So that's one formal thing. The other formal thing is making appeals or depositions before council, writing letters, all that kind of stuff. And again, there's no feedback mechanism. So you can do that. You can talk at a hearing for a rezoning or for a temporary use permit or a variance or whatever it happens to be. And it's just your turn at the mic. You say your thing and you walk off. And unless the council says, could you elaborate? Or what do you actually mean by that? Or da-da-da-da-da. It's next, please. And on it goes. And then they make up their mind. And sometimes they make up their mind immediately following the comment period. And that is a disservice to the process of democracy. You can make it so much better. One thing that used to happen quite a lot was town hall meetings. And they tended to be bitch fests. You basically came and pointed fingers at your trustee or your Metro Vancouver Director or your councillors, whoever, and said, we don't like what you're doing. Then you can have moderated town hall sessions or information sessions. And so that happened during the national park, where they would be moderated by people like Chris Corrigan or Bert Painter, who are professionals. And they do a very good job of essentially bringing the temperature down and allowing for better discourse. And they usually have breakout groups, and then they come together and say things. And it's structured, it's much more friendly. It tends to build consensus. So another thing that you can do, and which has never been done on Bowen, but it is done easily elsewhere and could be implemented. It's something I've barked about for quite a long time. And that is, there are apps and there are actual hardware, which are instant response or audience response voting devices. Today, we're talking about we should be building a swimming pool. How many want a swimming pool? And 89% of the people in the room or who are attending by Zoom just go yes, and they vote for that. And you go, wow, everybody wants it. Okay, how much is it going to cost? And it's going to double our taxes. And suddenly it's 12% are doing it. And you go, well, okay, we want something we can't afford. What's the answer to that? And how about if we didn't do the dream facility, but we started on it? We built, a basic pool. And how about if it was outdoor, not indoor? How about, and what you do, each time you do that, you iterate the process and you vote on it, and you find out, that instead of going up and down, it slowly rises up if you ask the right questions, and it reaches an asymptote. And that's as good as it's going to get with this group. And you have actually gleaned an incredible amount of information. You know that 60% of the people actually are willing to pay a certain amount to have a pool, and it's generally something that people want. So on the basis of that, you can go ahead. Or you can go, if it's 51%, you go, no, this is too divisive. We shouldn't do that. If it's 20%, then you absolutely know it's a bad idea and you don't do it. So why we don't undertake that, and we can buy the devices for about $30,000. You can buy the software for probably $1,500 or $2,000, or you can just use SurveyMonkey and ask the right questions, and you get an awful lot more participatory democracy. And I really would like to see our democracy here bloom, because Bowen is a great place for that, because we are close to our issues. We have tons of people that actually show interest in political things, and we could be active partners in our own governments.
I am curious why we haven't done some of those things, and I guess the answers will become apparent with what the new council does the same or does differently. So where are we headed? Or what's the question I haven't asked that I should?
We could talk about speculation. Where are we headed? And I already said that, you're headed where you're going unless you change direction. But the corollary to that is that even changing direction by a little bit, it makes a big difference over time. And if you slow the freight train down, you don't get hit as hard. I think that left alone, that what happens is big parcels of land get divided up into small parcels of land. Land gets created where it doesn't really exist. If you look at Rivendell Estates across from Rivendell, that was all filled in, blast and fill. The community was at the effect of the blasting for 2 years while that went on. For the poor people down below on Prometheus Lane and in Artisan Square, they were hearing jackhammering and blasting for, all that time, and then the construction. And now people have moved in, and, people are getting to know each other, and tensions are abating. But it was a very intrusive kind of thing. An interesting thing, Mike Caracello, who was accosting me because he runs the Mike's Bins. And he said, I can't do business unless I can get on and off the island at least twice a day. And he said, I have to wait for ferries, or the ferries are late, or, something's broken down. And he said, I'm at risk of losing my business because I can't get on and off enough. Bowen is getting too big. And I laughed, and I said, but you rely on turnover and people, throwing stuff out. And he said, that bothers me even more. He said, everybody who moves on, who buys a house from somebody else, is generally wealthier than the person they're displacing. And the stuff they throw out is a good measure of that. And they throw out rolls of copper wire or, stuff that obviously has residual value. And so I think that there is a trend towards, becoming a more affluent community, that it becomes an exurb. We already are a suburb, but it's sort of like a privileged suburb. People move here who do move here with their eyes open. It's not just the greenery and the trails and all the things that they like about in the sense of community and the smallness. They like that there are really, really good educational opportunities on the island. I mean, our community school is actually the flagship of the West Van School District. I mean, there is no other elementary school that has, an artificial turf field with lights, that has, accessory washrooms, has a full-size field beside that, has the gym, which was a community amenity and paid for partly by the community. And you have the homeschooling, or, it's actually run by Powell River. And we have IPS. For people who want to, there's access to Mulgrave and to Collingwood and West Van. So Bowen attracts young professionals who have families that want them really well educated. And those people tend to have a bunch of money, and they are desirable residents for Bowen. They're really, one level, very, very good for Bowen. But that's the trend. That's what we are trending to, becoming a much more exclusive community. And at the candidates meeting, everybody talked about pushing the diminishing of diversity and the poorer people being pushed out. People already now, to get somebody who is a tradesperson is extremely difficult. And I know for myself, I needed a water line dug, and I ended up having to dig it myself because I could not find anybody who would do it except somebody who could barely lift a shovel. That, obviously housing is a big issue and associated with that. We are headed in that direction inexorably. And the way to address that is to, in a sense, respect our community plan. So every time we revisit the community plan, and we've done that, in the 70s, it was written, it was revisited in the 80s, and then rewritten in the mid 90s. And I was chair of the APC when that was done. And we critiqued the entire document. And then it was done in 2011. And Sue Ellen Fast was sitting on the committee that chairing that committee. So there were, people with an eye to the document. And the remarkable thing is, every time it got redone, the same things were said. On a high level, this is what we want in a community. And those are reiterated by different people at different stages, because they are values to which the majority of us ascribe. So the OCP was updated very successfully. And a lot of it, the land use component of that, was based on landscape analysis and carrying capacities. And it was also driven by philosophy. And I think that one of the major inputs to that was pattern language, which stated the ideal community size is around 7,500 people. It's small enough that you know each other, and it's big enough that you can afford the services that you want. Bowen is growing sufficiently. We're actually the fastest growing area within the region, which isn't hard when you've got a small population, but we're growing faster than Anmore, we're growing faster than Belcarra or Lions Bay. And it's because of the special nature of Bowen that it has very, very appealing. So we're growing fast, and we're going to push that within the next half century, certainly within the next 30 years, perhaps, that we hit, 7,500. But our OCP and our land use bylaw essentially had that asymptote of population, because it would be what's nominally called the build out. That if you build on every folio, and you build a primary residence on every folio, and you have 2.4 people in each home, what will the population be?